This is going to be a relatively brief presentation on the literature review. And the main ideas from this came, unfortunately not original from me, but they came from an article that I distributed under a separate email called A Guide to Writing the Dissertation Literature Review by Justice Randolph. And again, the ideas that I'll be presenting here are basically a summary of what was presented in that particular article. What we're going to be doing is talking about what is a literature review, why it's important, and then how you do it, how you actually create the literature review, how you research it, develop it, and write it is going to be available in a separate presentation to avoid making this too long. So what is a literature review? Well, I think we've talked about this before, but it's essentially a summary and synthesis of published material. Okay, lots of authors are out there, lots of researchers and journals publish research material, publish articles that contain documented, verified, reviewed research material, and that becomes the body of literature associated with a particular topic. So a literature review covers some or all or most of the relevant material on that particular topic. Okay, so if you're planning to do a research paper, you're planning to do a dissertation, you'll choose your subject area and then make yourself familiar with the literature that's relevant to that particular topic. That is called the literature review. But in addition to simply listing all the things that have been written, a literature review should also synthesize the material. And again, I'm taking this from an outside source, the Writing Center at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which says that the synthesis involves reorganizing, reshuffling the information that's been previously written. It might result in new interpretations of the older material, or it might combine new ideas with older interpretations. It might trace the progress of the thinking in a field over time, including debates or controversies involving different points of view on a subject. It may, depending on the situation, evaluate different sources that the research comes from and allow the reader to understand which are the most pertinent or relevant. So a literature review can do any or all of these in addition to additional things. But basically it should be both a summary as well as a synthesis. So when do you need a literature review? Well, nearly all peer-reviewed journal articles will include a literature review, and nearly all doctoral dissertations will require a literature review. I'm saying nearly all because there's always going to be an exception or two to the rule, but in general, the literature review is something that distinguishes scholarly writing from popular press. Okay? If there's a literature review involved, it's probably considered scholarly. If not, it's probably not considered a scholarly article, and also appropriate to various uses within your own research. The students, of course, will ask, well, how long does it need to be? How many pages or how many sources do I have to quote? There's no absolute number, but the literature review should be long enough to demonstrate that the student or the researcher has a solid knowledge of their topic and understands the previous work and how that previous work has contributed to the current understanding of the particular subject that they're interested in. It should be long enough to provide a foundation for their original research that's going to be completed. Okay? So the literature review is kind of like building the ground floor, and the ground floor has to be solid enough and complete enough that when you start building on top of it by doing original work, that you've got all the spaces covered. You can put your framing on top of your foundation, but if you leave a gap, the framing isn't going to hold up in that particular area. And that's what you need to be able to do, to cover all the different aspects of the topic with original work. So as a rule of thumb, longer research papers will have longer literature reviews. Shorter research papers will have shorter literature reviews, similar to writing articles. So when you write an article or you write a paper, if it's a short paper, you probably won't have 20 pages of references. If you write a longer paper, 20 pages of references may be just the start. So it depends, but generally longer requires more literature, shorter requires less literature. But The caveat, of course, is longer isn't necessarily better. Padding a literature review, just like padding any type of an article or work, tends to show that you don't know enough about the subject because you think you have to add extraneous material or irrelevant material just to make it look like it's long enough. So that's to be discouraged in the literature review. So now we want to say, well, why is this so important? Why is literature review considered to be such a critical element to the overall research process, especially the dissertations? So the literature review is a method or a means to demonstrate that whoever's writing it knows a lot about a particular field. They know the vocabulary, the terms, they know the theories that are involved, they know the variables that are used to conduct the studies, they know the phenomenon that they're looking for, they know the methods that are used to analyze the information, and they know the history about the field. Okay. If you can't demonstrate that, why would somebody reading the paper think that you know anything about it, or you know more than they do? So the literature review is kind of a demonstration that the author thoroughly understands the field that they're going to be talking about. It also, as you're doing the literature review, makes the author, or student in this case, become aware of who are the other researchers in the area, who are the research groups, who are the journals, which are the journals that contribute to this particular field. So again, as becoming an authority or an expert in a particular field, the literature review and the process of creating the literature review informs the student about the field. And if it's well done, it may turn into a publishable article all on its own. Now, some of these additional reasons are going to look like a little bit of an overlap, and it's true, but I just wanted to, again, kind of summarize what the article says about these particular things. So additional reasons might be delimiting or helping to define, separate what the research problem is from things that don't really belong there. It may open up new lines of inquiry. You may be thinking about the research in one way, but as you do your literature review, you find that there are different ways that would be maybe more productive. It also helps avoid approaches that are not going to yield good results. This is what we're always trying to do with our students, is to make sure that they're in an area, in a topic area, and approaching it in a way that's likely to produce results. You may find ways that of approaching the research part of it, collecting the data and analyzing the data that's been done before. And so if it's a proven methodology, those are the areas that are going to be, those are the types of things that are going to be very useful when you start constructing your own methodology. The literature review helps your conclusions, as you're writing up your conclusions and writing up your recommendations. It allows you to then supply additional information about that. There are additional, and again, these kind of overlap with some of the other ones. They maybe extend on it or summarize it or look at it a little bit different way. But again, there's plenty of reasons that a literature review is extremely important to the dissertation writing process and actually to any kind of original research. And just to wrap up, the purpose for writing a literature review that wasn't mentioned above is that it provides a framework for relating new findings to previous findings. And it also then allows you to establish that what you're doing, your new work, is actually not done before, and that it's establishing, based upon the shoulders of the previous research, something that adds to the field that hasn't been done before. And you really can't do this unless you can demonstrate that you understand what's been done before. So again, lots of different reasons why the literature review is important, but this also helps us, as we're thinking about, going to be talking about how you do the literature review, it helps us understand what needs to be included and how we're going to write the literature review to meet all these criteria. And the last thing I'd like to look at is how the literature review relates to the prospectus template that we're currently using. And I think you'll see that this kind of summarizes in a neat way how the two go together hand in hand. And what I've done is I've simply stripped out all the text material, all the commentary from the template, and gone to the basic questions that the student writing their prospectus has to answer. First of all, what's the topic? And here, the literature review is going to provide preliminary knowledge about a particular area. Now, they may not have a complete review at this point, but as they start thinking about their topic, they should have read some of the articles. They should be familiar with some of the theories in the particular field that they're thinking of working in, and this then informs them about what are the potential topics they might want to work with. And the second question is, so how did you arrive at this topic? And here we go into the streams of literature. The primary stream, which should always come from their specialization. Okay. Well, obviously that's going to be developed from the literature. Whether you want to call it the literature review, which is the formal document that gets written, or you want to call it the process of reading the literature, but this is how you come up with the ideas about how this topic is built upon, your topic is built upon work that's previously been done. So you have your primary stream of literature, you have your secondary or tertiary or more streams of literature, and again, those are coming from related bodies of literature that need to be analyzed. And this actually shows why maybe you don't want to have 3, 4, 5 streams of literature, because if you've got to write a literature review for each body of literature that you're thinking of incorporating, this is going to be a massive task. Generally, we want to have 2 streams of literature, somehow that are going to be related to each other in your original research, but you probably don't want to have a lot of streams of literature because you're going to have to demonstrate that you're an authority in all those particular areas. So obviously the literature review, the process of literature review is important to coming up with the answer to this question. Number 3, how do the bodies of literature that you've identified frame the research question that you plan to answer? And again, if you go back to the objectives of the literature review, you'll see this comes directly out of it. The literature review requires showing how previous research leads to the gap, or generating what the hypothesis or research questions are going to be. You can't have a question that's unrelated to the previous literature. It has to kind of fall out of it. So this is extremely important then to developing your research question. Now, when we get to the research question, again, if you've done serious literature review, you'll see the different types of questions that have been proposed, the different hypotheses that other people have investigated, and whether they've been able to prove them or disprove them or not prove them. It gives you an idea about the types of questions that people are researching. And finally, the final question of the template is, how will I prove or disprove my research question? Okay. Well, by doing a good literature review, you have reviewed proven methodologies that have been used in the field of study. You know which instruments have been used to collect data. You'll know the methodologies that have been used to analyze the data. So the literature review, again, directly goes into the information that's needed to fill out the prospectus. And the prospectus, of course, is supposed to be the outline of how you're going to proceed with the dissertation. So, as I said before I went into this slide, the literature review, the prospectus, and ultimately the proposal, and ultimately the dissertation, all are intimately tied together. And that's why it's so important that we understand how to do literature reviews, what we're trying to accomplish with the literature reviews, and we actually design our classes so that the students are beginning to review and understand the literature. Well, as I said in the very beginning, this presentation is about the what and why of the literature review. It's not the how. The literature review is a critical component of any scholarly work, sets the stage for generating your hypothesis, developing your primary research approach, and any conclusions that you're going to be forming from the results of your research. The how you write it, how you develop it, how you research it, will be coming in a separate presentation. I just didn't want to make this one too long. You're welcome to provide any questions or comments on this, and I look forward to hearing from you. Goodbye, and good luck.